gonna start the engine building process and the whole tedious building of all the parts and components and measuring and all of those good things. We just got in the crank. We're gonna inspect the crank. We're gonna install the bearings and the crank cage. We're gonna check all the clearances and start the assembly process. Now in this video and the next few videos, it's gonna be very technical. So there's gonna be some things that are repetitive that I'm gonna try to just brush through so it won't make the video boring. And then the parts that need attention, so just focus on those parts because those are the parts that are important. So stay tuned and enjoy the video. Alright, so the next step that we're going to do is actually very important that a lot of people don't even talk about, but it's temperature. To assemble an engine, you need to be in the 71 degrees all the way to the 78 degrees. Any more than that, any colder, any hotter than that, your parts will expand more than they need to, and they won't give you good clearances, the correct clearances. So I have this little gauge here, thermometer, that I'm shooting the table. The table is at 73 degrees. The rods are 73 degrees. The bolts are 73 degrees. All my parts are at 73 degrees because that's the temperature that this room is in, and everything was sitting here for a few hours before I did assembly. So if you bring a tool or part from outside and you bring it inside into the shop, to the garage, wherever you're going to be working on, let it get adjusted to the temperature where you're working, so everything at the same temperature. So over here we have the rods that we're going to install, the cage bearings, cage bolts, the bearings, thrust bearings. These are the new bearings for the cage, and we just got in the crank. So let's inspect the crank. I've been working with this machine shop for a long time, many years, so I know they did good work, but it's more so to show you guys what we're looking at when we get the crank. They were able to fix it, and another thing is I try to keep all these metal parts on cardboard so they don't scratch. There's some parts that are very easily bent or dented, so you do that to try to save it from having any issues. So this is the rod journal that was damaged, if you remember in that last video, and it is cut and shaved down, and it has an oversized piston, so oversized bearing. So that is this one. This one, the machine shop left it for me with the oversized bearing. The rest of them didn't need any work, so that's the only one that needs the oversized bearing. The rest of them is just going to get the standard size bearing. So what my machine shop did for me is mark the front of all of my rods for the front facing of the rod. The back is cleared, and they also marked on the position that they're supposed to be. By doing that, on a regular build, if it was all brand new parts, you can put them whichever way you want. But because we're reusing the wrist pins and the pistons, then the 100,000 miles that it was wearing into here, that it didn't do any damage, it just wore itself into the correct position. Well, you want to keep it the same. If I was to flip it over or use it differently on a different cylinder, then it will wear differently and it will just take out more material. So to reduce that and to stop that from happening, we leave them in the same positions that they came from. And same thing with the pistons. When we take out the pistons, we mark them. Like over here, it's marked 5. Over here has a 3, has a 1. So we put them back into the cylinder that they came out from, because over time they came into position and came into their size. They grinded themselves into position, and you don't want to have to break in the engine. Although we're gonna put new bearings, we're gonna have to break in the engine for that, but that's very minimal. We're not doing new pistons and things of that sort, so it's gonna be a light break-in, if anything. So the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna put bearings in the cage. We're gonna use the new bearings from Porsche, and then we're gonna measure it. And at the same time, we're gonna measure every journal of the crank, of the main, and we're gonna check the bearing clearances. And I'll show you how to do that, but we're gonna speed up the video and we're gonna go faster and slower, and I'll show you the important parts. So stay tuned. So now we're going to put in the bearings, and they have a little keyway over there, and they go specifically to one spot. And now when installing bearings, you want to make sure everything is clean, oil free and everything. The oil goes on top of the bearing, not underneath it. Now that I used the dial bore gauge and measured the bearings from the case, I'm going to convert my measurement from the dial bore gauge to the micrometer, and from that it's going to give me, I'll be able to do the calculations and find out my exact oil clearances. Great news. So I just finished measuring the bearing clearances, and we have the same bearing clearances through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 at 15 thou, and 5 and 6 are at 14 thou. That's in spec. These two, the 5 and 6, are slightly tighter, but that's fine. I like that. I'll give you higher oil pressure, really nice and tight. So I was really surprised on this cage how consistent it was. When I measured all of them, they're very much in the same line. The deviation we had was in the crank, but the crank we know has some wear on it, and it's not even a bad deviation. I've seen cranks even from the factory that had some changes in it. So the next step we're going to do is going to measure all the rod bearing clearances, just so we have it on paper, and then I could assemble the crank into the cage and start with the rods. Grease up the crank, and we're gonna do all all the journals, the rods and the crank, like rods and the mains this time. So even if we end up not putting in the rods today, it'll be greased and it won't rust, because I'll have a coating on top of it. That'll prevent it from rusting if it ends up sitting, because right now this is all raw steel, and we don't want it to start getting any rust, surface rust on it. And this is actually the most exciting part. One of the most exciting parts. This is the mating of the bearing to the cage. So this is literally the first two parts that go together in this engine. And hopefully it won't come apart till the next 10, 15, 20 years. And another thing about these brushes that I use, I pull the loose bits out of it before I use them, just so you don't get that stuck in between the bearing when you're assembling it, because that can cause catastrophic failure. But also at the same time, just keep an eye, make sure that none of them do come off. Any of the bristles from the brush, like you see here, these are kind of tight because I pulled on them before. You don't want that. And clean shop, clean parts, clean shop. Extremely important. Okay, so now we can put this aside, and it's the time, it's like the birth of this engine. The rebirth. Ooh. Look at her turn, nice and smooth. Save some of that grease. I like that. I like it. All right, now I'm gonna take these bolts out. I'm going to take some brake cleaner and clean off all these marks, because I'm going to have to remark them when we torque them again. So let's mate these two, put some grease on, mate the two, and then we can start torquing it. Hey guys, so crank is good. Next part is rods. So the rods, we're gonna have to put the bearings in here. We're gonna torque them, and then we're gonna measure them. So we're gonna see if our clearances is good, and after that, if everything is good, if we don't need to make any adjustments to the bearings, then we can install it. So here's the next part. right, quick update. All the bearing clearances, perfect. I love them in machine shop. They're great. So now we're gonna put in three rods. 3 rods starting with the last one, second one from that one, and second one from that one. These are all gonna be on the same side. These are gonna be on the ones that are on the passenger side. So I'm gonna start installing them. Install them first, lube up the bearings, make sure the mark faces forward. And another thing with these rods is that these rods are from the factory. The way that they do them, they break them. They make them and then they break them in half, so you can't put them wrong. You have to put them the same way. And that actually is a good thing. When they're a rough surface like this and it's like a puzzle to put it back together that they fit perfectly in, they can't shift. So that makes a better rod. So now we are going to lube this guy up. And we're gonna put them in place, and we're gonna do the same, torque them all, and then we will be ready to install the cage into the block. And like that, the cage is done. It's ready for install, and that'll be part of the next video. We're gonna install this cage in the block. We're gonna start putting the pistons inside, connecting the other rods into the block, piston rings. Even we're gonna be doing something special by balancing the pistons. It's unnecessary on a stock engine, but I build race engines, so why not? We got the technology for that right here. Please like and subscribe. I need the subscribers, as many as we can. Tell a friend that might be interested in this type of content. And I'll see you next time. And don't forget, if you ain't got haters, you ain't popping. I forgot to mention that I've been using the temperature gauge throughout the day to make sure we're at the same temperatures. So overall, the crank and the rods and the cage are all in 74 degrees right now. Most importantly, they were the same temperature when I was checking for clearances. When you assemble, sometimes it's okay, it's not a big deal, but when you're doing the checking for clearances, it's very vital that you have the same temperature on all your parts so they don't heat and contract at a different temperature, and you get different clearances, and you can get to problems later on. It would be a shame to not go through that step and go through all this trouble. So good luck. Take it easy, guys.